All right, well, everybody, looks like we're not too bad. We ended up splitting with the Vikings and Lions this year. As long as we didn't get swept by either of them, it saves us a little bit, saves our reputation. Because once that happens, man, I mean, once you're less than 5-1 against the Vikings or Lions, that's a bad situation, man. That goes from being a below average team to a disaster situation.
Yeah, and it was an interesting game. I mean, the Bears have put themselves into an interesting position as far as what that playoff outlook, looks like. And this was really kind of the major hurdle, I think, because they get to head into a Jacksonville team next week that I think has every intention of losing now that they're sole holders of that number one spot. So it's interesting the way this season has really lined up and really the ebbs and flows, right? I mean, we got that Lions loss, they beat them early in the season, that game against Detroit where they blew it against the interim coach. I mean, I think that was really rock bottom, and they've kind of started to rise up, and the good, fortunate start that they had to the season has really helped them out at this point and put them in a position they probably really don't deserve to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can look at it one of two ways. We kind of put ourselves in this position. Like, this team could easily have a much better record than where we're at right now, like a much better record, or we could have a much worse record. We're kind of in a weird situation where that whole stint with Nick Foles was just such a train wreck, could not have gone more poorly. And you know that because we talked about it all at the beginning of the season that, hey, you go to Nick Foles, you can't go back to Trubisky. You just can't do it. You look desperate at that point. And what did Matt Nagy had to do? He had to crawl back to Mitchell Trubisky's front door in the middle of the night. And he had to ring his doorbell and plead for him to come back and save him. And so far, Mitchell Trubisky, while you have to say that he isn't the person leading the force, right? I mean, he clearly is the side piece right here. The main force of this is Matt Nagy and Bill Lazor's scheme and how they're using Mitchell Trubisky and the reemergence of the offensive line, which has been performing really good. I mean, Bars has looked pretty competent. Sam Mustipher in particular has been such an amazing piece and someone that long-term should definitely remain our center. Okay, so the emergence of him has been huge. Supposedly, I was reading some. I can't remember which analyst was talking about it. Maybe it was. Honestly, it might have been Kyle Long talking about it, but he said that Whitehair kind of struggled with picking up blitzes as a center as well, which is very important as a center. So having someone more vocal and more trained at the center position like Mustipher has been such a blessing for the team, I believe, outside of just, his pure physical talent. Cody Whitehair is playing a lot better. Alex Bars at that guard position. I mean, what the hell more did Matt Nagy need from Coward to realize that he's not good? And then Ifedi at right tackle has been really solid, really, really solid. Probably a potential replacement for, Bobby Massey.
Yeah, I think overall, just in general, having that offensive line, they've been there 4 to 5 weeks now, has just really helped this offense. I mean, this is what we wanted to see out of the running game at the beginning of the season. And, Trubisky only had to throw 20, 21 passes in the game. I mean, he really didn't have to anything. Yeah, didn't have to do too much. The game was really built upon, moving the football on the ground. If it wasn't with Montgomery, it was with Trubisky as well. And the Bears kind of got into their groove, and it's a style of play that accompanies, the way that this defense plays, pretty well. I mean, a Bears defense that's, knocked up right now, but I think that, some players definitely stepped up this week, not to get off topic from the offense here, but, I really like what I saw out of Bilal Nichols. I mean, he played like a monster. Oh, yeah. It's kind of been a couple of straight weeks, that he's really shown up to play. Along with Mario Edwards. I mean, I think they've been really good, at filling in some of those missing gaps along the Bears defense. And also, I think Kendall Vilder, stepped to the plate and played pretty well, especially early in the game, tackling Delvin Cook, and then late in the game, getting that deflection away from Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, and let's actually get more into the actual game, and then we'll get back to some more generalities about how this Bears team's performing. But as far as Kindle Vildor, Duke Shelley, they did pretty good. Obviously, going up against Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen is not the easiest task for some of your first starts. I can't remember which one of them it was. I think it was on Vildor. Man, he got a defensive pass interference on Adam Thielen that was clearly an offensive pass interference by Thielen that ended up extending the Vikings' last scoring drive, which really could have screwed the Bears over. And this gets back to just the consistent theme that seems to be throughout, these Bears games, but a lot of NFL games, which is just really terrible officiating. And I actually do think that they should make it's hard to say because the refs kind of killed it to begin with, but I feel like calls like that should be reviewable or challengeable. We went through the pass interference thing and it didn't work out great. And I agree that it shouldn't be for like every single situation, but for really insane cases like that, it should really be reviewable because that could have completely determined the outcome of the game. But any thoughts on that, Reese, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, over the whole league, officiating's been pretty bad. I think the Bears have been kind of in one of the teams that's had, poor officiating happen to them frequently, which has been pretty unfortunate. And it does just suck that, like, in today's NFL, like, we shouldn't have to, like, really worry about that many missed calls. Like, it seemed like we made so much progress over time with instant replay, and now we're kind of starting to go backwards a little bit. I don't really quite understand, but it doesn't really seem like, some of these big, blatant missed calls. I mean, your mind goes to that, what was it, Minnesota or Saints Rams game, a couple years back with that pass interference call. I mean, it's just like we get like some of these bigger, more notable calls, and it's odd to me that like we haven't made progress on it. That's what bothers me.
Yeah, I think that I'm almost on the stance that pass interference, defensive pass interference, like if it doesn't show up, shouldn't be challengeable. But calls that get called pass interference because they're so impactful, you should be able to review those. You get what I'm saying? So, like, I agree with the whole timing of the game situation where it's like, okay, things happen in real time. It makes sense. It might look a lot different when you slow it down. You might see, more pull. You might see more pushing, more fighting, whatever that is. You might see that more when you slow it down. When really it wasn't that impactful on the field. But for calls that are already made on the field, I feel like you should be able to challenge those, offensive or defensive, whatever that may be.
Yeah, and I kind of hate sometimes in the NFL too that the pass interference is a spot foul. I kind of like in college football how you get the 15 yards automatically. I mean, I get the intentions behind it, but I mean, I don't know. I hate seeing like huge penalties that are over like 25 yards. That's just kind of ridiculous.
I think that we just need to make pass interference a much less commonly called call. Like we have to make it so much less like gentle. There's so many times where you're like, this is really, it kind of could be, kind of isn't. I think it should really be reserved for like blatant calls where it's like, okay, yeah, this guy really interfered with this guy's ability to catch the ball. With Vildor, it just was completely phantom. It didn't exist, and that got called. Not to mention that they fucked up on both teams by forgetting to reset the play clock for both the Bears and the Vikings at one point, which made the Bears get a fault or a delay of game penalty, and the Vikings had to spend a freaking timeout, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, that should never happen. I mean, if you have to stop the game to get the time right, just blow the whistle, get everything straight, with the scoreboard and all that, because having timing issues or like when they get the downs wrong, that can never happen.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And watching this game also, that the time where the Bears were like inches away, so they did a QB sneak on third down to go ahead and pick it up. It made me think about how laughable it is that the NFL has has the judges. Okay, they just use a random guess with their eyes to place the football. And then they take out the precise measuring chains to measure their random guess. And it's like,
Yes.
it's like, isn't there a better system? Like, can't you do? I mean, I fail to believe that the best way we could do this is just, yep, it goes here. Like yeah. Even though this is a game of inches, as we say, we are going to completely determine where the ball is placed just based on our best judgment.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's some human error that's always involved in sports, and with officiating, it's not going to be perfect, and it's part of the game. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely sometimes some very favorable spots that go or happen that, it's not, yeah, like you said, it's not a matter of inches, it's half a yard or so.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, let's go ahead though and get back to talking about the Bears, talking about the Vikings. Man, David Montgomery, he has emerged over the past couple weeks as one of the premier running backs in the NFL, which is insane because throughout his entire career, he has had nothing but the absolute bottom of the barrel offensive lines. And it's kind of the same message that we were consistently hearing, but I don't know if we necessarily believed. And I think that this little stint of him, when we see even the slightest offensive line reemergence, has been huge because we are seeing what David Montgomery can do when he gets even the slightest bit of help. It's not like these holes are being blown wide open for him. There's a couple times a game that might happen, and he's getting these big plays off of them, right? But he has just been so good. And until, I believe, over the past 3 or 4 weeks, he's been averaging 7 yards a carry, which is insane.
Yeah, it's been crazy. And I think, one of the main criticisms that people had of David Montgomery, at least, over the past, season and 3 quarters or so that he's been playing now, was that he's, too patient, sometimes doesn't want to attack the hole. But, now that he's getting these creases, sometimes actually a decent sized hole, he's just hitting it and he's, really dropping his pads. And that's the best way that, you can, work with him to run the football effectively. I mean, you just got to give him space where he can keep his momentum going and break those tackles because he's just someone that runs with a really good pad level. He doesn't have elite speed. I don't think he has like elite cutting ability, but he's really just a determined runner. And it's best if you can just let him, grind those yards out. So I think that just, the slightest bit of improvement, like you said, has gone a long way. And before, I mean, Montgomery was just having to push through holes that didn't really exist or, try to bounce it outside. And that's when, we saw, his weaknesses of, maybe not being the quickest or most elusive guy, got him knocked in the backfield a couple of times. But now he's, just punching ahead. He's, when he gets the football, he's at least going to get, 2 to 3 yards, sometimes 4 or 5. And then, he breaks off those, couple nice runs a game, it seems like.
Yeah, and I really am excited for his future. And I know that the coaches love him. Matt Nagy is always talking so glowingly about him. He says that he just will call up David Montgomery and talk to him because, like, earlier in the season, he was talking about this because he knows how difficult it is running behind the line that we currently have. And seeing just his emergence, it's insane to think that this is a running back, right? That a year ago, Matt Nagy compared him to Walter Payton. He said that this guy is very similar to a great that played in Chicago, obviously referring to, Walter Payton.
Right.
Which is insane to think about. That being said, he has shown over the past couple weeks just how elite of a runner he can be. I mean, we're not talking about kids numbers. He's put up over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in each of the past 3 games. Okay. This past week, he put up 60 yards. I mean, that's insane. That is truly elite numbers. And if he did that, if he maintained this pace over an entire year, which obviously isn't going to happen, but if he did, he'd be, in store for well over 2,000 yards rushing.
Yeah. I mean, if he was able to keep like 160, yards a game, which is very lofty and pretty hard to meet up. Yeah, he could definitely start to get up there and, hit those 2,000 numbers, which is extremely, almost nearly impossible to do in today's NFL. But, he's definitely someone that this team relies on. And, since it's still not the most sure in the passing game. I mean, Trubisky is definitely not, unprone from making mistakes. He's been a sense of consistency for this offense, and something that we didn't have in the beginning of the season that's really been nice, and I think it's really been the main improvement, is just that ability to stay on the field, drive, and create long drives, and stay ahead of the chains. I mean, the Bears are in much better down and distances, consistently, and on third down, they're not putting themselves in that 7 and 8 situation that seemed like they had early in the season and when Nick Foles was playing. And, now at least they're putting themselves in very manageable situations that, just increase their probabilities to win. And with the Bears defense being pretty consistent, it's a pretty good formula.
This team reminds me a lot of the 2018 Bears. Like, we're not winning in spite of or because of Mitch. He's just kind of the guy that distributes the ball, It's Nagy that's behind the offense, or Laser, whoever you want to say. We really don't know exactly the extent to which each person is, contributing to this offense right now. Obviously, Laser play calling is pretty huge, but yeah. So
I was just going to say this real quick, and this is just something that popped in my head, just from, watching some of the highlights back of the game afterward and reading the comments. I always like to see what everyone else is kind of thinking. Of course, you get different, kind of varying, football intelligence, intelligence is Jesus, or like kind of football IQs out there, people that actually understand the game. But, a lot of people saying, Montgomery's underrated, and I get that. And then people are like, oh, yeah, Allen Robinson, too. And it just made me think, Austin, I was like, I always remember that game when we were talking, bad about Jordan Howard and got a lot of flack at Soldier Field for talking about, how we don't think, the Bears really need him. And he's not really an asset to the team as far as, how his abilities fit Nagy's offense. And not only has that proven out to be true, I think that Allen Robinson has really kind of become that Jordan Howard for this Bears team currently. Because I think there's a lot of people that have this distorted image of, how great he is, that he's underrated. And I just don't understand how people are talking themselves into this. I think that very much like Jordan Howard, he has traits that, you can get out there from a lot of other, people at that same position. He's not really someone that has like any kind of elite or unique talent. And I think I've kind of started to become, I think people listening consistently would be like, oh man, this man just hates on Allen Robinson. I think he's a top 15, possibly top 10 receiver in the game, but I think saying that he's underrated is far from the truth. And I think Bears fans are very much split, I think, on, how they feel about Allen Robinson.
Yeah, the thing with Allen Robinson is I agree. I think people view him, he's been one of the few steady pieces on offense, similar to what Jordan Howard was for a couple years. So people are just accustomed to rooting for him on offense, which is the same Jordan Howard situation. At the time when we were at that game talking crap about Jordan Howard, and some fans overheard us, and we're commenting on it. I had a jersey that was a Jordan Howard jersey. I'm never rooting against any Bears players. I really like when players are on the Bears. I remember when Allen Robinson first joined the Bears, I was super excited because that was at a time where, the step up between him and like Tanner Gentry, who we had at the time, was massive, And I think that Allen Robinson, I wouldn't mind re-signing him. I think that he could potentially prove to be a good re-signing. That being said, we always need to keep, the contracts that we give out in the lens of, is this player replaceable? You shouldn't typically in the NFL pay for replaceable talent. That's why we didn't pay Adrian Amos, because even though Adrian Amos had a great year with us, and he's a decent strong safety, he's a starting caliber strong safety, it's not hard to find strong safeties in the NFL. I mean, look, both of these past 2 years, we've had two other dudes come in and give us good production levels out of there. I mean, Treshaun Gibson has been pretty decent this year, just as good as Adrian Amos,
I mean, the Vikings did it with Stephon Diggs, and I'd argue that Stephon Diggs has more unique traits than someone like Allen Robinson does, and they were able to trade him, and in return got someone like Justin Jefferson, who is on a much better rookie contract, and it's just a more sustainable option.
And we always need to remember, like, it's just how the game goes. Players, they'll come and go. Allen Robinson isn't like a Khalil Mack to me. If I had to describe him on one player on defense, right, and how you'd ideally want him when you construct a major offense around him, I'd compare him to like a Danny Trevathan. Okay, he's a guy that is really good. He's good. He's very. He's a leader. He's going to provide you a lot of value by having him on the team, but you don't want him to be the offense. You don't want him to be, the defense. The way Danny Trevathan is a supporting piece, but also a point of stability at the same time. That's how I believe a perfectly crafted offense around Allen Robinson is. Would I pay Danny Trevathan to be the top inside linebacker in the NFL? No, but I also don't want to get rid of him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I view Allen Robinson. I like Allen Robinson a lot. I think he offers us a lot of consistency. But unfortunately, just based on how our offense is, there's a lot of other places that money could be going, and we could probably replace him in this draft.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's very true. I think that that's probably a really good way to put it, as like someone like Danny Trevathan that has skill, is, maybe not elite at that position, but one of the top players at that position. But at the same time, I mean, those kind of traits, come along, maybe not every draft, but every couple of drafts, there's going to be someone that, comes along that has, a potential to maybe hit, where they're at. And sometimes you have to take that kind of risk. I mean, the Bears, unfortunately they have great depth on defense, but at some offensive positions they don't have the best depth. And the best way of building depth is to hit on some of these younger players and take some risks. And you have to take risks, and when they work out, then you can really start getting yourself in some really beneficial situations.
Yeah, and we talk about Allen Robinson all we want. I mean, we talk about him all the time. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Mitch, right?
Yeah.
Mitch is putting up really good numbers, statistically, if you look at him. And if you just look at the stat sheet over the past couple of weeks, I'm sure he probably ranks definitely in the top 10 statistically of quarterbacks. That being said, I think us Bears fans need to keep a realistic outlook on this. Anything that happens this season, it shouldn't impact whether or not Mitch is on the team next year at this point, because we know what Mitch is. And I think on the broadcast they were saying it, Matt Nagy's kind of found out what Mitch is, and that's what I think has led to this offensive success. Is Matt Nagy has given up on the idea that Mitch is going to be the franchise quarterback. And instead he understands that he is an imperfect quarterback, but you're able to win with him. Okay. I can't remember who was talking about that on broadcast, but great point. Absolutely great point. Matt Nagy realizes that no matter how much he gives it to Mitch, no matter what scheme he builds around Mitch just doesn't have the processing power to really make the most out of a West Coast offense, and one especially as complex as Matt Nagy's. So in order to have the best offense, Nagy is choosing to kind of dumb it down, figure out ways to move the ball, which is similar to what he did with Mitch in his first year with us, right? This team really reminds me of the 2018 team, on offense at least, where we're going to see a lot of success, but it doesn't mean anything for Mitchell Trubisky. And we need to really understand this. Nothing could go worse than us re-signing Mitchell Trubisky. Okay? That is the worst case scenario. So us fans should not be asking for that, right? But what it does give us a positive outlook for is Matt Nagy's future with the team. While I do have my questions about Matt Nagy, I think that this recent offensive resurgence, especially paired with the offensive line looking a little bit better, is giving me a lot more hope that Matt Nagy is a good coach and could formulate a good team.
Yeah, and I agree with you for the most part. I think that, Trubisky isn't someone that we need to bring back. Like, we know who he is. Nagy knows who he is at this point. He's not the franchise quarterback. He isn't the answer. The Bears are doing their best that they can with him right now, and he's done about what we expected with him. I mean, he's been giving us, a couple 100 yards, usually a couple touchdowns, throw a pick in there, maybe some other kind of turnover like a forced fumble. So he has his detractors and he has the things that you like about him. But the Bears definitely shouldn't settle for someone of his quality or caliber. I mean, they need something a lot more, and they'd be a hell of a lot more successful with, someone that's actually a legitimate franchise quarterback or franchise quarterback in the making. So I definitely agree with you on that point. I think that, yeah, there are questions with Nagy, and I definitely feel like at this point, with the Bears organization being how they've been, he's played himself, back into being the coach next year. I find it highly unlikely that he's going to be removed. I don't want to just give the Bears the win against Jacksonville because, anything can happen in the NFL season, and when you start thinking everything's guaranteed is when things start, happening chaotically. So I think that, the Bears have to win against Jacksonville first, but you'd have to think the Bears probably win that game, and, maybe the Green Bay is in the position where they're resting players, so the Bears could very well finish 9-7 on the season, or at the very worst, you'd have to think 8-8. But, with that...
Truthfully, the Bears are in a really good position to make the playoffs right now.
Right.
Especially with the losses at the top of the NFC, with Green Bay likely securing the number 1 seed after this coming week. I mean, that's huge.
They just need that Cardinals loss. But, as long as they get that, I'd feel very confident. And, I bet you Green Bay, even if they're resting starters, is going to play hard and play tough. But, at the same time, I don't think Jordan Love is going to come out there and clutch it for them. So anyways, as I was saying, I think that, 8-8 at the worst, 9-7 at the best, and at the best possibly make it into that playoff spot. It seems very possible that they could, secure that final wild card spot and be competing in the postseason. It just it seems very unlikely that the Bears will move on from at this point. And I definitely have my concerns because I would like Nagy to handle adversity a little better. I would like for him to be more adaptable. It is promising what we've seen in the past couple of weeks. I think that, this is the best the Bears have looked all season on the offensive side of the ball, the past 4 or 5 weeks. So you really have to like the way that they've improved. And, I think it's, good as fans that we should keep the pressure on and should have high expectations, because I think that, ultimately it took hitting rock bottom for Nagy to really turn things around. And, I think a lot of it does come with kind of the media pressure and fan pressure that he was facing. And, it made him work harder and try to find something that was going to work.
I kind of wonder if Matt Nagy was struggling with delegating tasks. He's clearly the offensive mind behind this team, and he probably really wants to see it out into its full vision. But I think anybody who has had to lead anything probably understands that doing everything yourself doesn't necessarily work out well, and it kind of just waters down what it could be rather than if you delegate efficiently. And it seems like what we're hearing, at least from broadcast crews, is that Mitch Trubisky is able to talk with Laser a lot more than he was able to talk with Nagy, and just being able to, Nagy can shift his focus and he doesn't need to worry so much about play calling every week, and instead he can worry about design. I mean, look at Andy Reid. He delegates play calling duties all the time. So with that in mind, I mean, I think giving up play calling might have been something that benefited Nagy more because he's able to focus on things that are a lot less week to week. You know, he can focus on, you know, long-term schematical advantages, figuring out a good understanding of what plays should be in the books, talking it over with laser. I mean, being a play caller and a head coach is very difficult. And that's why we don't see it that much. You know, we see Sean McVay do it. We see, I think Cliff Kingsbury does it, but a lot of head coaches don't. You know, a lot of head coaches delegate that responsibility out to their offensive coordinators. And if you find guys that you like how Andy Reid does it, I mean, you can get some really quality play callers in there, you know? So I don't know if it's a control issue with Matt Nagy or what exactly it was, but it seems like Nagy is proving that he can be competent. And the one thing that I do know about Nagy is that Nagy isn't going to settle for being okay or average or below average. He's not going to settle for that, and he is going to try to consistently improve. Unlike the John Fox era of the Chicago Bears, where it just felt like he was okay going 6-10 every single season. I'm willing to see it out. You know, I specifically, I think the best option, honestly, is to evaluate everything when you get to the off season and just do a real full comprehensive look, see what the candidates are out there, see if you like anybody out there. And then if not, go ahead and do it. But there was also some rumors that Ryan Pace could still be fired even if Nagy isn't fired, which would be really interesting. You know, that'd be a very weird thing to do, I feel like.
Yeah, it would be. And especially when you had like the new GM with the old head coach. I mean, it's very much the John Fox and Ryan Pace situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a weird foot to start off on. It can kind of get you out of sync, which I feel like the Bears have kind of been, you know, recently. So I think that doing something like that probably wouldn't be smart. You know, if you're gonna remove someone like Pace, you might as well remove someone like Nagy, even with the improvement that he's shown. So I think, you know, you keep them both or you lose them both, and you know, I think right now the lean is definitely to keep them both.
Exactly. Well, I mean, do you have any last comments? I think that's really all to be said. It seems like we're on track to make the playoffs. I mean, that'll be interesting, you know? It's going to be really interesting if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important next couple of weeks, and it's going to have us on the edge of our seats. I mean, it's always a little nerve-wracking, but also exciting to see that in the hunt, in that whole playoff picture. You know, it's going to be on the screen 24/7, and especially if the Bears can go out and beat Jacksonville, it's going to be a hell of a lot more interesting. So at least it'll be an interesting last couple of weeks, and the Bears are playing some meaningful football.
Believe me, Jacksonville is going to be doing everything they can to lose that game, considering they now have the number 1 overall pick over the Jets after they somehow beat the Los Angeles Rams. So yeah, I can't say I'm too worried about the Jacksonville Jaguars, but we'll be getting more into this on our, you know, podcast that releases on Thursdays. So thank you guys so much, and bear down, guys.
Bear down.